So Ravens flock, we are in a very unexpected position right now. We're 1-5, and if the draft started today, we would be picking second overall, which would be the highest draft position we have ever had. Of course, prior to this, the highest was Jonathan Ogden, who we drafted back in 96 with the fourth overall pick. Then also in 2015, when we drafted Ronnie Stanley, I think we picked Ronnie either fifth or sixth overall. But still, in general, we haven't had a pick as high as number 2 overall before, which would be crazy. And it also makes you start to wonder, man, if this season doesn't turn around, what is going to happen with that pick? But also, before I get to that, that is also the reason why I really don't want to throw the towel in on this season just yet, because in the end, I don't trust Eric DeCosta to make good use of that pick. Because based on Eric DeCosta's terrible drafting history, I fully believe that if we had the number 2 overall pick next year, Eric DeCosta would draft a safety. I don't know what safeties are popular right now in college football, but whichever one is extremely popular, I'm 1000% positive that Eric DeCosta would draft him next year at number 2 overall. And that's another reason why I really don't want to tank and throw this season away. Because even if we got that high of a draft position, they're not going to make good use of it ultimately. Eric DeCosta, in the past 7 years as a GM, he has literally had the most draft picks out of any general manager in the entire NFL. Like, he has picked somewhere between 45 and 50 players. He has drafted between 45 and 50 players in that time span. And the vast majority of them have been complete bust. Now, many people will try to make an excuse and say that no GM is perfect and blah, blah, blah. We're not asking him to be perfect. What we are asking is, hey, if you're going to have this mentality of hoarding all of these picks every year, instead of trying to package some of these picks and trade up, then we're going to need to see you sooner or later show some sort of consistency when it comes to drafting players that actually make a difference. And he's in 7 years, he's yet to do that. We have a few picks that he's made that have worked out. Guys like Kyle Hamilton and Isaiah Likely and Matt Abike and Linderbaum. There's a handful of guys that have worked out, but there is a overwhelming majority amount of players who he has brought in who have just completely flopped. And again, we're not asking for perfection, but can you at least hit on 40% of your picks, 45% of your picks, maybe even 50%? And I'm only asking for that if you're going to stick to the mentality of always wanting to pick 10 to 12 players every single year instead of trying to trade up so you can get a better draft position and get a better player in the first round. But then even when we have first round picks, Eric DeCosta has made a lot of mind-boggling decisions when it comes to premium picks in the first and second round. The best example is David Ojabo. And this is another reason why I don't like the best player available mindset. Not because it's never a good idea, but because when people act like that should always be your mindset, to me that says that you can't read a room, that you don't take into account where your team is at. So you're not actually, in my opinion, you're not looking at the situation with any nuance. You're just applying a one-size-fits-all approach to your draft strategy. Now, of course, if you're a rebuilding team like the Patriots, of course, best player available, drafting them makes perfect sense. But when you're a team that's supposed to be in your Super Bowl window, because you already have the game-changing quarterback, that's half the battle. 90% of teams in the league right now would kill to be in that position. We already have that. That's half the battle. Then on top of that, you've already drafted 50 players in the past 7 years. And then on top of that, you've already traded for and given massive contracts to several different players. So you're already tied up with a team with a team that's in theory supposed to be set for a Super Bowl run. You should not be drafting best player available. You should be drafting based off need. But one of the decisions that Eric makes that's so confusing is even with the best player available mentality, there's been several picks he's made where they clearly want the best player available. Like we could have had George Pickens, which was a major need, a wide receiver, a big body wide receiver who's good at contested catches, which is something Ravens fans have been clamoring for. We could have had that, but instead he drafts an injured edge rusher. And isn't the best availability? David Ojabo wasn't even available because the dude was already hurt, and they still chose him over Pickens, which clearly did not work out. I don't care what you guys say about George Pickens and his attitude and this and that. It doesn't matter, guys. He's an excellent receiver who has been able to perform at a high level wherever he's gone. Whereas Ojabo, what is he? Nothing. Just another player who's injured, who's a bust. But I do legitimately think that Eric DeCosta would draft the safety next year. Because, and it's funny, me and Kev were in the comments in a video a couple months ago, and Kev T made a really good point when he said, it feels like the Ravens are prioritizing building around Kyle Hamilton instead of building around Lamar. Because you look at a lot of their moves, and that's what it feels like. Like, no matter what, they're just trying to maximize Kyle Hamilton. And it doesn't make sense because, in the end, Kyle Hamilton doesn't win games. As good of a player as he is, he's a great player. You still can't point to one game that Kyle Hamilton put us on his back and won. Like, because there aren't any up until this point. And I'm not saying just because he's a defensive player, he can't do it, but it's rare to find a defensive player in this generation who can do it. At that point, you're really talking about guys like Myles Garrett. You know, the Browns don't win a whole lot of games, but there are some Browns games that I've watched where Myles Garrett pretty much carried them to a win or got them as close as humanly possible. Like, there have been games where you see Myles Garrett where he literally will go out there, get 2.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and a blocked field goal. That's what they did against the Colts, if I'm not mistaken, last year. All in one game. As much as we like Kyle's not putting up those type of performances, and nobody's expecting him to, which is fine, but we're expecting Lamar to. So it makes more sense to prioritize something that would help Lamar, and not only Lamar, that would help Derrick Henry. Which is why if we do pick second overall, I would want to see us draft an offensive lineman. Whether it's a tackle or a guard, I don't care. Either one, whichever prospect is better at the second overall pick. Now, many people will say that drafting a guard or even drafting a tackle that high is a reach. Ladies and gentlemen, drafting a safety in the first round at this point in the NFL is a reach, but we still do it. NFL teams reach all the time. Who cares? When we drafted Odafe Owe, the same Odafe Owe that most Ravens fans don't even like and talk trash about now, when we drafted him, when we traded a starting tackle in Orlando Brown, when we traded him to the Chiefs to get back in the first round, we drafted a guy in Owe who clearly should have been drafted in the 4th round. That was a major reach, and everybody was cool with it. So what's the big deal in drafting an offensive lineman second overall? But this is another reason why ultimately I don't want to tank the season and throw in the towel just yet, because these are the type of arguments we're probably going to end up having as a fan base if we get that second overall pick. People will think it's just the worst idea ever to prioritize the offensive line with the pick that high. But if you talk about a safety, or if you talk about some middle linebacker who's getting graded really well by all the draft experts like Mel Kiper, people will act like it's the best decision ever, even though that same player will still be available in the 2nd round. If we pick that high, the only position that I think we would need to pick outside of offensive line would be wide receiver. And the only reason I say that is because based on how cheap the Ravens tend to be sometimes, I do think there's a strong chance that they don't plan on paying Zay Flowers. I think they should pay Zay Flowers, but knowing how the Ravens are, I could definitely see a scenario where they trade Zay, or would they just let him walk and don't actually try to re-sign him. And if that is the case, then obviously I think that number 2 pick would be better suited for a top flight wide receiver who can be in here, and we could transition to that guy in case the Ravens make a bad decision and let Zay Flowers leave. But yeah, man, in general, I don't trust Eric DeCosta with that second overall pick. We're all gonna be super hype about having the pick for a couple months. Then he's gonna make a pick. It's gonna be a head scratching pick that doesn't feel necessary. All the draft experts are gonna tell us that this was the greatest move ever. Then nothing's gonna really come from it. Or I'm not gonna say nothing, but there's a good chance the player may not work out, at least not with us. And then we're just mad because we're like, dang, man, we just wasted another opportunity. But let me know, do you think the Ravens season is going to continue to crumble? And if we did end up with the second overall pick, do you think Eric DeCosta would prioritize offensive line? Or do you think that he would just take that second overall pick and go get a position that we don't truly need, like safety? Because every time we think we have enough safeties, they still bring in as many as they possibly can. We just traded for one from the Chargers, and we just signed another one. But let me know, do you trust Eric DeCosta?